terms of what my original thinking was like.
Okay.
Um, and that was that, as you know, we're doing this fundraiser. I hope you can come on October 16th to raise funds for the homeless shelter. So I was trying to create a bridge between homelessness and a discussion about money.
Okay.
Above that would be planning. But if you kind of look at homelessness at the top of the triangle, we've got lack of planning, and then we've got catastrophe.
Yes.
And I just wanted to.
And we also have ignorance.
And we have ignorance, absolutely. So we have education in the middle of that area of the whole triangle, because education, I believe, is what we're discussing here.
Yes.
Yes. So the other piece that I think I began to share with you yesterday a little bit is that as a developmental psychologist, lifespan, and as a cognitive psychologist, the mindset, the cognitions that tie into both motivation, self-protection, awareness of alternatives, are things that start young. And then, they're mediated by life experiences, but they start young. And, in the best possible way, they get solidified by the time an individual is ready to launch into self-care and adult life. Sometimes it happens really super early for some people, and sometimes it doesn't happen at all.
Yes.
So with that framework,
I want to add another piece to that, because I've been thinking about this a lot since we talked yesterday. You also have to take into the generational differences when we look at this as well.
Absolutely.
And one of the main reasons I say that is because if you look at the older women that are now they're basically on Social Security, and if they're married, then maybe there's a pension, but many of them didn't go back to work after their children were born. Many of them are dependent, like 90% are dependent on Social Security. They also generationally let the male partner make the decisions about money, and because they didn't take an active role in that is one of the reasons they're probably in a more precarious situation than many others.
Right. And then the cultural mindset of women in that age group also wasn't necessarily self-care.
No, it was to take care of everybody else first.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I have a foot in both sides of that, and probably you do too. I think I have a foot in both sides of that generation and the one following that actually started taking more care of ourselves as women and putting ourselves ahead of some of the other choices that were made by our perhaps parents or grandparents. So,
right.
And I think that's a real important thing, because unfortunately, when we look at people in poverty, and we look at the largest section of people that are older and in poverty, they're widowed women or single women.
You bet.
And that's one of the areas that I really want to impact. I don't want that to continue.
Yes, absolutely. And I think I might have mentioned to you that as a sequel to my Virgin Widow book, which you're familiar with, is The Bride's Guide to Widowhood, which is before you even team up with anybody, that's the signal to secure a plan for your self-care, because there are no guarantees in life.
Correct.
Yeah. So I was thinking also about parenting.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, who might be listening in would be parents who have children who are ready to launch or getting ready to launch, or even grandchildren who are getting ready to launch. When I think of my own parenting experience, so as I was getting to launch, let's say in the 1960s, it was never in my sights to do anything but begin a path of self-support. And in those days, the parents might say, well, be a teacher or a nurse, it'll always give you something to fall back on, was the word.
I heard that many times from my own mother, yes.
Right, something to fall back on. But for me, falling back wasn't even an issue. It was really, the development of a path that would take care of me no matter what. No matter if I had a child, didn't have a child, got married, didn't get married, or anything. So that was kind of a parenting thing that got into me through my relationship with my father. So the relationships we have as young people really also set us on the path for whatever it is, we might develop as a self-image or a sense of our own capabilities.
Yeah.
So even as young children, let's say at about 10, we become capable of, in a sense, understanding mortality and even thinking about the future self psychologically. So maybe you could make some, as we talked about the different developmental stages, maybe you could make some comment both about the developmental stages in terms of what are the notions, what needs to be internalized in a child?
Well, I hope I'm going in the right direction with this. One of the things that I remember as a child being told when I asked about money, I was told that I didn't need to know. When I asked about finance, I was told I didn't need to know. And I think we should come up with better answers than that.
Well, that for sure.
When our children ask about money, and if they have concerns about money, we need to address them in a much more powerful way. So instead of saying, you don't need to know, or we're comfortable, or whatever other kind of comment was made.
Palliative comment.
Yeah, to just sort of push it away. It should have been said, listen, your father works very hard. He makes a good amount of money. We make a lot of plans around our money. We plan on when we're going to take a vacation. We put money aside. We plan for savings and retirement. Those are the things that we need to tell our children so that because there is no education on this to speak of. They do not have education in grade school or in high school unless it's changed, or junior high, or any of those places where they're actually guided into making good choices around money and looking at money from a holistic viewpoint. It's usually just how much can I spend, how much can I make. It's not using the tool to its best. Money is a tool, and you want to use it. And every dollar should have a job is one of the things I always tell people. And our kids would really get behind that. If you told a child every dollar has a job, they would have so much fun with that. They could create a game around what job does this penny have and what job does that nickel have. And it could be so much more empowering for our children. Because one of the things that really, really hurts me when I hear it and see it is how many parents of adult children haven't given their children enough freedom and independence, and they're still coming back day after day, week after week, asking for support. It just breaks my heart. I have clients in their 80s who are still taking care of their adult children. It's just...
Yeah, so that brings to mind the later generations that... probably starting with the parents of baby boomers, probably beginning there, where that kind of thing took hold. There was something that you said, just by the way, I have a friend in New York who started a program for education. I'm trying to think of the name of it, but she made this animated safe. And it was a talking safe, and she was an accountant and an attorney, and it leaves me feeling that she may be another one who would be wonderful to have in this amalgam of opinions about this, because absolutely children need to learn. And it's very interesting what one of the obstacles is, because I, for one, really would even take it one step further and understand, like, what does $100,000 a year mean? What does $65,000 a year mean? And parents are very reluctant, of course, to talk about their own numbers, because they're afraid the child will get upset or whatever. But
or that the child will tell somebody.
That's what I was getting at, that the child will tell someone. So we're on the same page there about the importance of early education. And paradoxically enough, it's those educational programs such as general diplomas and actually children who have disabilities, particularly intellectually, who are taught more about handling money than the children in the academic tracks.
Isn't that
place for it. Isn't that?
There's no place for it in there.
Right.
So it's funny that so one of the tools that I use with business owners sometimes is when we talk about how much money they make, we use an analogy, and I'm not going to go into the details of it. We don't have the time for it, but we use a dinner table analogy, and who's actually eating at dinner. And we have Uncle Sammy for the government. We have all the different aspects of business, and you could easily convert this kind of idea to children. It's a metaphor, and it could be created for children. Okay, who's coming to dinner today? And then, this is, we have the money, and that's the food, and these are the people that get fed.
And then there's the potluck aspect. It's like, what is Uncle Sam bringing to the table? And who's just vociferously eating away at everything? I love it. I love those kinds of characters.
A couple of ants with a bag between them so they can take some home, that kind of thing. So it's just, you can have a lot of fun with it.
A lot of fun with it. That's great. Thank you. I think that's a very valuable kind of, so many of the people who may be listening to our podcast are grandparents. Mm-hmm. Home Goddess Radio was initially marketed for women over 50, and yet the ones in their 40s are kind of clamoring into it, because who doesn't want to kind of have a sense of what's in store? Who wouldn't want to know in advance? So I think that's a great metaphor, and certainly when we can use humor and vision and in a sense graphics.
Yes.
For me, I was always the kind of learner that needed to see what the containers were. Mm-hmm. What was containing what, and how do we access what's being contained, and how do we route it?
Yes.
So that we can, if it is save or whatever else. So that's another helpful tool. I like the dinner table tool, and then whatever containers we can create. Can we talk a little bit about entrepreneurism? It's a favorite of mine, because talking about mindsets, there are a lot of young people, especially when they start getting scared and when they're in college or graduate school, and they're saying, what kind of job am I going to get? And what would happen if I don't get a job? And what kind of job would I have to accept if I can't get the job I want? And I'm always looking with my clients for what seeds might exist in an individual to be able to not have that fixed ceiling, but rather to develop the confidence to do some other kind of earning design that would help create more self-sufficiency.
And I think some people they just are naturally that way. I mean, obviously there are many people like that. There are other people who are not. I was not naturally that way. I never thought I would want to be in business for myself. And yet here I am, 20 years later, still in business for myself. I don't work for somebody else. And so it's one of those things that the mindset of an entrepreneur is that they really want to control how much money they're going to make. They want to control the kind of work they're going to do. And so you go into that particular business, but the financial side of it can be very, very scary.
Correct. And sometimes in terms of working with somebody who is feeling pressured by the ceiling, and at the same time has demonstrated some passion, some interest, often the case, which is like getting off the fast track.
Right.
But jumping onto what?
Yeah. Well, and it's a transition. So, and it's funny that you put it that way, because a lot of times it's the people that are getting to be our age and older that are looking to get out of corporate America. They've been in corporate America for 20 or 30 years, and now they would like to, they don't really want to, I mean, let's face it, if you retire and sit in a chair or go play golf 6 days a week, you really lose an edge.
Mentally.
Yeah, mentally. You
as
lose
well as self-worth wise.
and so many people don't want to stop. They just want to transition into something they love.
Correct.
Now, a lot of those people, they have enough money coming in from what they previously did and Social Security that money is not an issue initially or even ever. But it's the people that are doing this because it's something they love and they're not willing to sacrifice it anymore, whether they're ready or not to transition and whether or not they have the money to do it. Those are people that really just take a big leap. You close your eyes and you jump.
One of the things that tends to characterize people who might even be motivated to do such a thing is that many of them feel that like we have to do it alone. That I don't know if I can take this risk because I'm not good with numbers, or I'm not sure I can handle the marketing aspect of it, or I'm not sure I could do the day-to-day kinds of tasks. And it's so interesting to me how long it takes for people who might even consider entrepreneurship, how long it takes for them to say, you know what, I could build a team. I could get a partner. There's something about feeling like being in your own business at the beginning levels that feels like threatening because I'll have to do everything by myself. And that's like a missing piece, I think, for a lot of people, that they would even consider something like that.
And the team part is really critical because it's very lonely as an entrepreneur. And if you have employees, you really don't want to talk about everything with your employees. Or if you have a spouse, they may not understand. If you have a partner, they may not agree with everything that you're thinking. So having an organization or a group where you can go in and share ideas and talk about what works and what doesn't work is a huge, huge benefit. I know I'm in a mastermind group, and that makes all the difference in the world for me.
Absolutely. And no matter what, I mean, as we age, no matter what, under the best of circumstances, we need to really learn how to put together a support system for whatever reasons. One younger woman in her 50s, beginning 60s, is unwilling and frightened about living alone because she doesn't know, she would like to leave her husband, but she doesn't know about living alone because one of the examples she gave me was who's going to change the light bulbs? Like not even thinking about a support system other than the current partner.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that there's a lot to this socially and emotionally, anxiety-wise and all of that. You wanted to talk a bit about mindsets.
So, and you're talking about mindset right there, because that woman is in the couple mindset as opposed to the independent mindset. And I know I find myself doing the same thing because I've been married for 37 years. And so, I depend on my husband to do certain tasks. And if he's not around to do them, sometimes they don't get done. Now, when I think about it, I know I'm perfectly capable of doing almost everything that I depend on him to do. And so that's a mindset. So there's a mindset in life around being successful. There's a mindset in life about having money. And the people that have those mindsets are successful and they have money. If you don't have that mindset, or you're not aware of what mindset you have, that's where the biggest issue is, if you're not aware.
I always say awareness is at least 75%.
Because you operate on automatic. We all operate on automatic in a lot of areas of our lives. And if we don't take the time to really look and see how we make these decisions or what decisions we're making. So that's really a big part of what I've just created in my book, is steps to go through to look at where you really are making your decisions from and how you make your financial decisions, so that you actually can choose if you wish, and nobody's forcing you to. But you can choose, if you wish, to alter your behavior, to modify, to tweak, because usually it's not a huge. It's 2 millimeters. It's not a huge step.
I love that, because I think a lot of people think about risk taking as a large step, but the truth of the matter is that small shifts are really more realistic. And the other piece is the willingness to, number one, understand that there's choice. That's very hard for most people because it's yes, but I can't make that choice. Yeah, what does get aware and what is identified very quickly are the obstacles.
Yes.
So you're absolutely right that mastermind group or anything like a mastermind group where people can really tell the truth about what's going on for them and open themselves to input. And that's a whole other topic about how people offer input without meeting resistance. Because one's receptivity is something that also needs to be cultivated if one wants to truly change their own circumstances.
And I find that this is more of a natural state with women to be receptive and to look for support in groups. Yes. And it's so much more of a natural state for us where we enjoy it, we look for it, we embrace it. And I'm glad that I'm a woman. For one of the reasons I'm glad I'm a woman is because of that, because I really wouldn't want to be trying to figure it out all on my own.
And it's so interesting to me because some of my clients who come from other cultures, particularly European cultures, have a built-in shame factor about sharing the truth of things that they suspect may be, that may encourage other people to think less of them, because of whatever was going on in the particular European country at the time was too much information and would result in being shamed or being persecuted. Mm-hmm. So we have to also always bring up this, the issue of culture, and that there are some cultures who really celebrate group experiences, who even share their dreams by the campfire in the morning and really support the tribe, so to speak. Usually it's indigenous people who understand, because of the great threat to their security, basically understand the issue of the community, the value of the community, which we're also seeing now in real time when we see the disasters that are occurring and we get to see the value of being in a group or in a community.
It's so heartwarming to see that people pick up and help each other and, don't care about any of the differences that they may have.
Right, but that takes an extreme level of threat sometimes to activate that, and maybe what we really can do as people who might be thought leaders to be able to encourage that kind of sharing without waiting for that level of threat to their personal lives. And I guess this gets to the issue of planning as well. The threat to one's person, as well as, the environmental threat or whatever, or the war threat or whatever threat that might be. So it's much easier, obviously, to get people's attention and to encourage receptivity when there isn't a threat, which is why I think that if you were to make recommendations as a financial, do you mind if I call you a financial planner? How would you like to be referred?
Technically, I'm not a financial planner. Technically, I'm a financial advisor. So, because I don't have the certified financial planner designation, so that's the reason I can't use the word planner.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so as an advisor, even more importantly, but the emphasis is still on advising. It's very advisable that we understand what planning means earlier. And also, when I look at my generational chart of generational differences, planning for the future really even began to be a bit interrupted before the baby boomers became of age. And when the baby boomers came of age, there was a whole philosophy of, enjoy it now, spend now, and don't worry about the future. I think that as things become more realistic, and the millennials, for instance, are beginning to really be smart enough to see what's happening, there may be more planning. I'm not exactly sure. The ones I'm meeting are definitely more willing to be savvy.
Yes.
More willing to absorb.
I find that I agree with the millennials that I meet with. They are very much more interested in looking towards their, planning for their future. They've seen so many, they've seen the generations ahead of them, start and stop and sputter. And so they don't want that to happen to them. They don't want to be dependent on the things that the generations ahead were dependent on.
Right.
They realize there probably will be no Social Security for them.
Exactly.
They realize that the stock market can be great and it can be devastating. So they're looking for what they can do and keep a quality of life that they want. How are they going to go about? That's their inquiry more than anybody else's.
Right. And so that's where my interest in entrepreneurship, or at least an entrepreneurial mindset with support system, with team, is kind of like an intervention that just needs to be included in the education, or at least offered as an alternate route, because there's so much emphasis on the job. And of course now, the fields that young people might be choosing to go into, like IT in particular, like disaster management, unfortunately, are, that's changing what we need, and who we need. I always call it what the world needs now and who the world needs now. But the emphasis is on now, not what was so, in the past.
And there are university courses now on entrepreneurship, which they didn't exist 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
I don't even know if they existed 10 years ago, but they're very important in the university system now.
And I can imagine that as a financial advisor, you might find yourself exploring with some of your clients, whether that in the early planning stages is, you have a job now, you're working full time, but if you want to build a family, how is that job situation going to work with becoming, let's just talk about women, but let's also include daddies. How is that going to work? How is that going to work out? And what are the other ways of ensuring that there's a cash flow, even when there might not be a maternity leave or?
Well, as a rule, and it usually falls on the women, but I'm not trying to leave out the men either, because many of them now, it's no longer a stigma to be a stay-at-home dad where it was 25 years ago. To be the one who stays home and takes care of the children. But that for the most part, what happens is that women who stay home, or women who have children, end up not working as many years. And then when they do go back, they have to make sacrifices and perhaps work part-time jobs so that they can be available for their children and this happens more than men. And that puts them in a position of not really being ready for retirement. They don't have the ability to save. They make less money. Of course, we know there's a ceiling there and the jobs aren't equal. I mean, that still exists. But all of these things, you put them all together and you unfortunately have a whole set of women that are not prepared for the day that they may not be able to work anymore.
Right. So now we're faced with maybe 3 opportunity moments for intervention. One is dealing with the women now, let's say, who are in their 60s and 70s, who find themselves, I was speaking to someone the other day who was depending on a refinance of her home to be able to afford what she needed to afford, and she's in her mid-70s.
Yes.
And very alarmed. So there's that kind of group. On the other hand, there are the people who we can get, the millennials, let's say, who we can really help to install an earning mindset as opposed to a just earning with a job, but to be able to begin to see the options. And then there's the people, in between for whom it's coming up. They're in their 50s, maybe their early 60s. I think the mindset is beginning to spread throughout that age group. The later baby boomers, that retirement is not an option anymore.
Well, and there's also this wonderful Chinese proverb that I like to use, and that is the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago. The second best time is now.
Yes.
because it is never too late. And unfortunately, for many people, they won't have a choice about whether they can work or not.
Right, exactly.
Health will come into play, time will come into play, and anything that they can do to prepare for that is going to make a difference. Now, some of them, they don't have the option anymore of thinking that they're going to be able to put away $2 million before they retire. I mean, they'll be lucky to put some things together, but anything at all can be helpful.
Yes, and I think that there's a book by the same name. It's never too late, because if you think of yourself as 86, where would you be if you didn't do anything? Where would you be if you did something now? Mm-hmm. So there is this level of motivational education, or the spreading of inspiration or motivation to begin to plan earlier. There's also the troubleshooting of the difficult situation where somebody might be in the process of being widowed. She can see, the immediate future before her. And maybe she doesn't have children. Many baby boomers opted out of the child rearing. And even if they did, I just wrote an article for a magazine about ruptured relationships with children. And even if you have them, there's no guarantee that they want to take care of you, much less even have a relationship with you. And, so it puts women in a position to really, looking holistically, to really be able to not only find support, but true friendship, and to be creative about the living arrangements that need to serve us when we are in our 80s and we are maybe impaired or disabled. And what are those living arrangements? We hadn't really known much about them since the days when we were in communities with with extended families.
Yes, because extended families took care of each other. I mean, that was the way it was. Now we're all over the country. They also stayed put in one area.
Correct.
If you were born here, you grew up here, you worked here, and you died here. But you don't do that it doesn't happen that much anymore. People are born, they go through school, they grow up, and then they go move someplace else more times than not. And the parents get to a point where they're moving around for a while too, but then they're no longer moving around. And so you don't have that center of all those people to take care of you. You don't have that extended family.
Right, which leaves us without, many people without options because they're not educated about what the options are.
Right, and so when I meet with people, sometimes there's some hard decisions that have to be made, that ones that they didn't think that they were going to have to make in order to be able to continue to live in any kind of a nice lifestyle. I mean, they have to do some things. They have to sell maybe the house that they really love, and they have to move into a smaller place. They have to look at their spending habits, and they really have to say, okay, I really can't go out to lunch 5 times a month. Maybe I can only go out once a month. And, and there's always, then again, we're looking at, their group of friends or their people that they go and do these things with. Like if they go to have lunch with people and all of a sudden they can't afford to do that, it's one of those, looking good situations where they're afraid that if they say they can't go and people find out they don't have as much money, it's something about them. It makes them wrong. It makes them bad. And it's not, of course. That's not what we're saying. But there's,
But you're bringing up the psychology of lifestyle changes as an inevitability, as opposed to something that, may or may not happen.
Yeah.
And so, and I use the word desensitization because I can just even see in terms of my own growing older, how my cognitions and how my expectations can change and are changing, and I am really conscious of those and have been thinking, and maybe I'm unique in this, not unique, but certainly when I was in my 30s, I began thinking about alternative living because I was divorced at one point And so whoever knows, that was back in the day where they would say, well, you have as much chance of being remarried after 40 as being killed by a terrorist. I think those odds.
Those are terrible odds.
Wasn't it? But it was like a very glib phrase that people were throwing around at that time. So as a divorced person, I really did think about, how would I live? Not that I was ever supported, but let's just say I was being supported. How would I live if I wasn't living in a traditional arrangement?
Mm-hmm.
What would be the options? And I began looking into community and planned communities. I actually had Plan B to move into a community in Colorado if anything should ever happen, because it was not really a commune, but kind of like a commune.
Uh-huh.
And, that was that's a very crunchy thing. That's a very new age kind of thing. But I think it's coming closer that we may need to double up in our housing arrangements. We may need to go where the young millennials are going, which is, I want to live in New York City, but I need to share an apartment with 6 people.
Oh, I know, and they're doing it, and because they've become more minimalists. Whereas so many in our generation, it was like, how much stuff can we accumulate? And I'm not against stuff. Don't misunderstand this, but there is a point where it's just stuff for stuff's sake. It's no longer serves any purpose. And I love the idea that we've gone from creating extended living situations where there's seniors living in assisted living or independent living to now the concept, and it's been around forever, but actually now can be actively pursued, of a community living, like a group of women or a group of men really living in a home together and, taking care of each other without having to depend on a lot of outsiders, at least for a time being, until you get to a point where that doesn't work.
That's the other key thing, is to see the acceleration of the pragmatics of being with something as long as it works, and then having at least a preview of what could work or what might work. And of course, we're all different in terms of personalities. There are some people who would go for a community if they're feeling lonely. There are other people that would they don't need assisted living, but they would need simple companionship, which is far less costly to finance than moving into a $7,000 a month assisted living facility. And then there's the other end of the continuum, which is really what our fundraiser is addressing, in that we're doing fundraising to help people who are currently homeless and not homeless by choice. They're homeless because there's been a devastating not only a financial debacle or a bankruptcy, but usually then a divorce or the death of a partner. Sometimes there's the drug thing, but it's really less so than we would think, at least in this case and here in Tucson, that most of the women who find themselves homeless have found themselves homeless because of a catastrophic life experience, either health related or otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Well, financial disabilities and of any kind will bleed your finances pretty much dry. And then the catastrophic is when that happens to a point where there's no recovery. There's no seen recovery at that time.
Yeah. So what have you seen as an advisor? I mean, I can't imagine that anybody would come to you in that state, but has that ever happened?
Well, I've seen people start to go down that road. It doesn't always start fast. It's very subtle. I mean, I have a couple of clients right now who they're precarious. Let's just put it that way. It's a precarious situation. I know that they don't have a lot of income. I know that they only have a very limited amount of resources. And it's what I said before. It comes a time, and you don't want to wait too long if you start to feel this way, where you have to make some very difficult choices. If you have no children to depend on, if you have nobody else to depend on and you're on your own, or you don't want to depend on your children, or they're incapable of helping you, you really have to start looking, am I on track? Am I on track to stay healthy and with a home and be able to support myself? Or am I going down this path that's going to lead to me not having a home?
How vociferous are your interventions when you begin to see that kind of subtle slide?
I tried to talk about it a little bit. I'm not as blatant as saying, hey, if you don't stop this, you're going to be homeless. Maybe I should be. Mm-hmm. But as an advisor, I have to walk a line as well. Mm-hmm. And so I try to be as strategic and as sensitive as I can to the person, because usually what it means giving up is something that's very important to them. And it could be supporting their adult children. I mean, exactly. When you get to it, this is a big thing in this country right now. People are supporting their adult children to their own detriment. And so I always ask people, like people that are our age or older, I said, when you were struggling, who helped you? Did you have to figure it out, or did somebody pick you up? And sometimes, you are in a position where you actually do need some help. But sometimes you really need to struggle in order to become independent. And, these are the world of the helicopter moms and the participation trophies and all of that. We maybe have made that generation less independent and less able to struggle to succeed. And unfortunately, it's the parents of those children sometimes, and that's not always, I mean, this is definitely not always, but those people don't know how to stop giving to their own detriment.
Yeah, I was just working with a client yesterday who has two daughters who are just launched. And, just the fear in her heart that what if the partnership doesn't survive? What if they don't find work in the direction that they're really comfortable with or able to do? And she's a woman in her 60s, and financially she can afford to do that, but psychologically it's not advisable, because as you say, in order, we don't want to say no pain, no gain, but the developing adult, and these kids are in their 20s, do need to find a way. It's the same way as when they're in their 70s or 80s, they're going to need to have those muscles developed to find a way. And
it's unfortunate, but the people I'm thinking about that I know have children in their 40s.
I agree with you. There are those.
And those are the ones that I'm like, there's got to, you can't continue to do this.
So it sounds like you and I are on the same page in terms of, in the end, it tends to come down to education.
It's a lot of education, but there's a lot, education will get you really closer to where you need to go. But when we talk about these family relationships and the ones that are not, they're not the best they could be, because, these adult children are still dependent on their parents for everything. And some are disabled, some are not, they're mentally challenged, whatever reason, there's reasons to take, that's always been in our life, in our world. There are those that need to be taken care of, but there are the others that just really need to struggle to be able to learn how to be an adult.
Well, as a psychologist, I see that as education.
Okay.
Family education, for sure. Social education, for sure. There's the financial education piece. And I think it's also the ability to grow the long view that, is always, most of the time difficult for the young to see the long view. There are those who do. It's the normal curve. 66% of the population has no sense of future. Then there's, a percentage that is living in the future. And then there's another that they think they're going to, they can't imagine living beyond 50 or 60 or what. And maybe they have good reason for it. Mm-hmm. But for me, it does come down to all those kinds of, like anything else, we want to prevent these disasters, or more than anything, the desperation part. Because desperation is, as a motivator, doesn't really lead us in a thoughtful direction.
Desperation leads to more desperation.
Exactly.
More times than not, and to clinging to the first thing that's available, which may not be the right thing.
Right.
Or the best thing.
Right. So then we get to, again, the issue for every city of caring for the homeless, which does, in the best of circumstances, involve training, and it does involve education. And then you get to see, similar to disaster management in cities that are struck by such disasters, is who was it who said, Blanche Dubois, I rely on the kindness of strangers.
Absolutely. Tennessee Williams.
Which is another mindset.
Mm-hmm.
But then there are those strangers who really are charitable.
Yes.
And everybody does have to, somewhere, not, I shouldn't say have to. I mean, there are many people who, in their own personal evolution, want to be of service, want to be able to give back. And there's so many social problems to address, this being one of them. It's just something else to add into the mix.
And I find that is education as well. I worked as the board of director president for the Boys and Girls Club of Lake County. And one of the things I loved about the Boys and Girls education of their members was they educated even those that had very little, that they always were in a position to give back to the community. And so it's a piece of education that's probably just as important as all of these others that we've talked about.
So developmentally as well, is that, in the mindset progression, the mindset of the older people is really about, the appreciation and the gratitude on the one hand, and the desire to be generative, to give back, etc. And when you interview anybody who's given back in any situation, you really get something very special psychologically, which is a feeling of self-worth and a feeling of value. And regardless of one's financial status, to have that as part of one's own self-esteem is almost as good as it gets,
Right.
At a certain age. Yeah.
The feeling of being able to make a difference for another human being is usually the most gratifying feeling that any human being can have.
Well, I love that you've said that. And I think if we want to land this conversation, that would be a beautiful place to land it. Before we go, is there anything else that you feel that's necessary to be said? Our listeners, like are women most of the time who've raised their children and are now approaching the later stages of life. Is there if there was a piece of advice or a quotation or anything else that you would like to share, Pam Hoffman?
Well, my advice is to assess your situation
as early as possible,
and with eyes wide open, because it's what you don't know that's going to come up and bite you in the what. And because when you do that, and if you feel like you don't know enough about it and you want to talk to a professional, make sure you find a professional that, first of all, you can trust, and they understand you, they listen to you, because this is one of the issues that women talk about when they talk about assessing a financial situation. They don't feel that they're capable of doing it themselves, and they don't feel like people are listening to what they're saying.
Or trust, or they
trust.
Also have big mistrust.
Yeah, and so you want to find somebody that you can trust. And I would say interview a few people before you make your decision on who you want to work with.
Right. So the first advice is to have that awareness, and have that awareness reinforced by somebody who you can trust and you feel comfortable talking to.
Yes. And one more thing.
Good.
With or without your partner. You don't have to do it with a partner. It could be that it's just part of your having a greater sense of what your situation is.
I like that piece of advice, because circling back to the very beginning, finances are not the domain of one partner or another. It's the joint mindset of both partners that are really going to be, in the end, what influences the outcome.
Yeah. And very seldom do both partners have the same way of approaching money or finances.
Right. Right. So true. Well, Pam, thank you so much for being with us. And in the show notes, I certainly will include a bit about your upcoming book, which is called
Wealth Amplified, 5-step guide to make more money, keep more money, and love your life. And it will be available. It's available for pre-order right now, but it will actually be out next week.
Thank you for sharing with us. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.